Welcome to the Second Bite Podcast, where we talk with top entrepreneurs and CEOs about creating valuable companies through creative transactions. Now, let's get started with the show.
Welcome to the Second Bite Podcast. We have a terrific episode today. I have Matt White, the founder, CEO of WHITE64, joining us. Matt, so good to have you today.
Great to see you, Todd. Thanks a lot for inviting me.
Yeah, I got to tell you why I'm so excited. So this is the Second Bite Podcast, right? And we talked to a lot of people shortly after they've had a second bite, shortly after they've created their transaction. Now they're working towards a second bite. In your case, your transaction happened 5 years ago. And so to be able to have a conversation with somebody that now has that much perspective, I think is going to be fascinating. So I'm looking forward to that. In your transaction, we got cash at close and we got an earnout, which you wanted to be for 5 years. And you wanted it for 5 years because that tied in well with how much longer you wanted to work and the rest, right?
Exactly.
So there wasn't equity because the buyer was Pentagon Federal, which is a large, enormous financial institution, and they just don't operate that way. So there's a lot of stuff that I'm excited for us to unpack together. I think, and I've always felt the history to WHITE64 was interesting. So maybe you can take us back to the summer of 2018 when we were working on your project. Tell me who WHITE64 is and who you serve and what you do for them.
Sure. Thanks, Todd. And thanks a lot for inviting me. Just to clarify, I am actually not the founder. The founder was my father. I was the CEO and chairman, but my father started the business in 1964, and it was an advertising agency. It was a boutique advertising agency. My dad was one of the madmen of Washington, D.C., and he had a very colorful history and was a big impact on my life. He was a great creative guy. I'm not a creative guy. I'm an account guy, a businessman. But our agency in 2018, and like a lot of businesses from 1964 to 2018, it evolved. And the business was strong and growing in 2018, but I was looking for a transition. I was 58 years old, and I was looking to figure out how to exit out of this thing. And I actually met you through DeLucchi.
Chris DeLucchi, yes, from DeLucchi.
I called her. She was a friend of mine, and it gave me your name, and I talked to a number of different people, but I ended up connecting with you, and we hit it off, and we looked at a lot of different things. I don't know if you recall, at the time we had some strong business. Pentagon Federal Credit Union was a client of ours and was a good client, but we also had the Washington Metro. We had
I think you had the lottery.
No, we didn't have the lottery. We had the CFP board, the Certified Financial Planning Board. We had done work with Hilton hotels. We had Koons. We had a number of local Washington businesses, and strong, viable business. And so it our businesses and the agency businesses go up and down. So looking for an exit was something, and we explored agencies, frankly, and this is pre-pandemic, right? The world had really changed, hadn't changed like it did. So we were looking at, opportunities in New York, and really we weren't confined geographically. We had talked to other agencies in the history of the company, but we had never found the right fit. And so, we started working with you to try and find the right fit.
Yeah. And, it's interesting because a lot of the agencies that we work with now are digital first agencies, right? Mm-hmm. And they're all SEO or paid or other forms of media. And obviously there was no digital first in 1964 or 1965 or when you took over as CEO.
Right.
And I think transitioning a business is certainly more difficult because you have customers and clients that trust you and rely on you, and you're still figuring things out yourself,
Right.
Because you're entering into a new world.
Right.
So, can you remember back to going into that? As we went into the process, what you remember as your biggest concerns or fears about a process?
Well, I think that for any owner in a legacy business, a family business, there, in my case, I have 4 daughters. I mean, one of the considerations was selling it internally, right, and keeping it in the family the same way that my father sold it to me. But my dad has subsequently passed, but at the time he was alive, and I had a lot of conversations with him, and we just thought that the way that the business was going, that we didn't have the resources available to invest in the business in the way that it was necessary to keep it going, and to pay for an earnout on my part, and then not saddle the company with debt. That we really needed to bring a third party in that was an infusion. And, as it turned out, PenFed was really an awesome suitor, because James Skank, the CEO, is very much of a visionary. The guy that my direct report, this guy, Shashi Vora, he's super smart and has really been hands off and let us run the business. At the same time, they have provided us the capital that we need to be able to invest. And you talk about it, we absolutely, at that time, were not a digital first agency, but today we are. Today we are very much. I mean, digital makes up almost 80% of our work.
Wow. And has the top line revenue of the agency grown as well?
Substantially. I mean, the business is much larger than it was when I sold it in 2018. And part that worked out well for me on the earnout,
It works out well for everybody.
For everybody.
Yeah.
For everybody.
And one of the reasons I'm glad that you could join us today, so why don't we jump into this and we can just jump around, is, people are always nervous, and I think rightly so, about taking an earnout or accepting an earnout. And so it's great to get perspective of somebody who's been into it for now 5 years.
Right.
Now, it was 5 years by design, right? And which is, I would say, is unusually long, but it fit your purposes really well. And I think rewarded you really well.
Right.
Going into creating the earnout, and I've got our sheet here that was in the file, and I'm going to walk through because I think it's helpful, kind of the formula that was developed. But do you remember the biggest concerns you had at that time about the earnout specifically? And is there anything that you think you can point to as to why it's been so successful and why Shashi has had enough confidence in you guys to remain hands off?
Yeah, I think, obviously the biggest concern was anytime you get acquired, and particularly an entrepreneur feels like he's going to lose control, right? And there is a certain amount of humility that has to come with an acquisition, that you're going to have a boss. But the reality is that, Todd, we have clients, and I've worked with clients, for 40 years, and at the end of the day, the client's the boss.
Correct.
Right? So he may not be my boss and on paper, but if he doesn't like what I'm doing, he's going to fire the agency. And
if he calls you at 4:30 in the afternoon on a Friday, you're going to be late for dinner.
Right. You're taking the call and you're doing what you got to do. So I thought I was going to really struggle with that idea of having a boss. I had just, personally, I mean, my dad retired in 1992. I had been doing my own thing for a long time. I just wasn't, that was my biggest concern. And the beauty it was, though, is these guys were really hands off. They held us accountable for the profitability. They want us to deliver the numbers. And fortunately, we were able to deliver the numbers. So
I remember one thing that was interesting to both of us at the time is that PenFed had an internal marketing department.
Yeah, 100%.
And yet they were using White64 for marketing. What was that dynamic like? And did you compete against the internal guys, or how did all that settle out?
No, I mean, and we really never have. We've had different CMOs at PenFed over the course of time. We just so happen to have, really, for the last 3 years, have had an exceptional CMO, and who really knows how to get the best out of both his internal operation and his external operation. Now, keep in mind, we are owned by PenFed, and PenFed is a client of ours, but we have 20 other clients. So it's not like, they're like any other client, really, except, every now and then Shashi will call me up and say, "Don't I own you?"
Yeah.
I'll be like, "Yes, you do."
What do you need?
What do you need?
I remember having a conversation with James when we were in the process at one point. And, part of the reason they were interested in you is because they wanted, they want to improve their talent. And I think there's a dynamic of being a very large and successful financial organization, and the people you can recruit as talent for that. And as an independent agency, as I always said, kids don't grow up saying, "Geez, mom and dad, if I become a great marketer one day, maybe I can go in-house at a law firm or a financial institution." They want to work with a cool place with exposed brick walls and snacks and all that kind of stuff. And I think, to James's credit, he realized that having a great, well-recognized independent firm literally right outside the window, although he's got perspective from his office up top, but right outside the window would allow him to get that talent in an independent. Do you think that added to the desire for them?
Yeah, I do. And I mean, a lot of people right off the bat would say, what is a credit union doing buying a advertising agency? But the reality is James is very entrepreneurial. And so he definitely saw kind of the changing landscape and what's going on in the media. And he also saw there's a need. I mean, we are because we are owned by a credit union, we are what is called a CUSO, a credit union service organization. So we do work with other credit unions, and we provide the same kind of service that we provide to PenFed, we provide to other credit unions. Now, that still only represents, maybe, even if you put all those together, 25% of our business. We still have 75% that's in travel and tourism and transportation and, a bunch of other things, retail, so but what has happened, and what, James did that was smart, is he invested in the business. We have a full-blown studio, so we're able to produce in-house video content, let's say. I mean, it's not called TV commercials anymore. It's really content. And it whether it goes on your phone, on your laptop, on your whatever.
Yeah,
device,
wherever you're viewing.
Whatever, but video is the new vernacular for sure, and digital video in particular.
Yeah.
And he spent a lot of money to build us out a state-of-the-art studio, which, frankly, I'm kind of going back to that conversation I had with my dad. We would have never been able to afford to invest that kind of money.
Yeah, and I think that oftentimes is it, right? I see this often, people in your position as the owner, if I don't spend it on a studio, it comes in my pocket.
Right.
If you're a private equity group or a large institution, if you don't spend it on a studio, you're going to spend it on some other element of the business.
Right.
And so now it's not between your pocket and the studio, it's between the studio and some other business objective and how to fulfill on that.
Yeah, exactly.
It makes it a lot easier to spend somebody else's money on something so important to the business.
Exactly. And, we not only did we build out a studio, we went a year ago, we purchased a digital agency, the Jake Group, which was located in McLean, Virginia. So we've added the Jake Group capabilities. Again, that was an interesting partnership that we were able to create between PenFed and White64. And so that we're able to, I mean, you were alluding to it. It is very hard to just hire internally and make that transition to being a digital agency.
Right.
And, what we've been able to do is look at growth through acquisition and investment. Yeah. And they are, PenFed's an acquisitive company.
Yeah, they really are a very, I mean, what James has done there overall, transitioning from I would say, a credit union to a really large, nationally competitive financial institution has been very impressive to watch.
We started working with them in 2015 before. So they were a client of ours for 3 years beforehand. And we were the guys that did the PenFed's got great rates for everyone tagline that really got him going. And, but at the time they were like a $14 billion credit union. They're approaching $40 billion this year.
And not all of that because of White64, but
we'll take credit for it.
Certainly a meaningful part, for sure. So let me ask you, because again, and this is why I'm really glad we can have the conversation, because a lot of people think, earnouts is dangerous. You never get it. And you have had the opposite experience.
Yeah.
If you were to look back now over the last 5 years and explain to somebody the 2 or 3 biggest reasons why your earnout was so successful, what would you say to that?
So I think it is 2 things. And just a little backstory. Before I did this deal, I was part of a CEO roundtable group, and a lot of the guys in the CEO group were government contractors. And, they were getting big multiples and they all exited, but they all exited and then ended up leaving. They took the cash up front and then were gone. They were acquired by big companies, but there was no room for that entrepreneurial spirit. So I think the reason that it was successful is, one, I think PenFed has very much of an entrepreneurial mindset. So they are interested in new ideas. The second thing, and that really worked to my advantage, is that I was able to retain the core management team. And in fact, 5 years later, all of the same people are still there.
So that's very telling, because I know that every entrepreneur I work with is concerned about how particularly their leadership team is going to react. Was there a specific way you handle that or discuss that with your team you think is helpful?
Yeah, I do. So I think I could have probably, and this is interesting, I think I would not have lasted the full 5 years if I didn't divide the payout. So my earnout, I split. I took half and the management team took half.
And did you say that to your management team? I'm going to get half, you're going to get half.
Yeah.
So they knew the split right up front.
Knew the split right up front. Had an excellent CFO who, everybody trusted in, and you could see the numbers and see how it worked. And, hey, it was my business. I could have kept more money, right?
Yeah.
And I, it could have been 75-25, or it could have been any other number, right?
But the reaction from them was what?
It was very positive.
Yeah.
And it's kept them in the game, and it's kept them wanting to, and we have exceeded the earnout.
And I'm looking again, this was something that Shachi produced for us, but what was, and I'm going to come back to managing that, but I think it's helpful to know the way that, so PenFed is a financial institution and they think about cost of capital.
Right.
So the way that they structured their earnout, so you had an earnout amount that you were going to get over 5 years.
Right.
And the way that they structured this deal was that they're putting money into acquirers, the cash you got up front.
Right.
There's a cost of capital.
Right.
So each year out of EBITDA, the first amount of that EBITDA goes to them, their cost of capital.
Yes.
The very next is your piece.
Yes.
The amount you're supposed to get.
Yes.
Then everything over and above that, we're going to split it.
Yeah.
And the split, if I remember, was close to about the same. It favored you a little bit early, and then it favored them a little bit later.
But basically, yes. The first 2 years favored us. The first 16 months favored us. Then it favored them. But it kept us. It incentivized us to exceed our earnouts.
And I think that's the part that I was so impressed with from Shashi and James's perspective.
Yeah.
Because they said, listen, here's what we need. We need to get a return on our capital. That's what our institution does. And then we want you to get your earnout. And those two numbers were well below what we were projecting for profitability over the next years. And then they said, we're going to split everything else.
Yeah.
So we're going to be real partners with you guys.
Yeah.
And then sounds like they lived that as well.
They have absolutely lived that and been very true to the deal. I think what's interesting in that CEO group that I was in, I don't know anybody who has done a deal like mine that has stayed for 5 years. I really don't. I mean, our deal was done in September of 2018. I mean, we're coming on the 5 year.
2 months away, right? Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty crazy. I don't know anybody. I had lunch with Shashi yesterday. I mean, like I said, we have become friends over this course of time. And, what I have learned, I've learned a lot about business. And I have learned that my internal team is very motivated to see. And I think for a lot of CEOs, certainly entrepreneurs that own privately closely held businesses, there's a tendency to not share the numbers, right? You want to keep it, you don't want anybody to see, but we have really for the last 5 years been very open book. And I think that has fostered a level of trust that I probably didn't experience. The other thing, though, is the management team that I put in place, Carrie Boydell and Nate Whittington, they have really been exceptional. So I think I was very fortunate in that regard. I could have had different talent. And
I mean, they are good people. They were talented people. And it always feels like whether it's equity or bonus pool or some incentive structure, if you can pull out the greatness that is in many people, you get the rewards of that.
Right.
With the open book, do you feel like that in your because how many are on your core team? Carrie, Nate, but there's 5 total that you shared the bonus with?
Yeah, I mean, really at this point, there's just 4 of us.
Okay.
There's just
so do you feel like they felt like they own the company now, that this is a big opportunity for them?
Yeah, 100%. And Nate and Carrie and Annalie is the third person. They, are in the process of, structuring a kind of an entrepreneurial solution to go with, because when my deal is done, their deal is done, right?
Right.
This is the end of the game. PenFed owns it. If they don't come up with a solution to motivate these guys, it all goes.
And do you suspect they will?
Oh, 100%.
So this is the thing, right? And this is very interesting because PenFed is owned by its shareholders, right?
Yeah.
Not by James, not by Shashi, not by anybody.
Yeah, by members. It's members.
Yet PenFed has kept highly talented people there without using equity.
Right.
So there's a mentality behind that you can keep really good talent if you motivate and reward them well.
Right.
And it does not surprise me that those two, particularly Shashi, recognize that without the talent, it all fades away,
Yeah.
either rapidly or slowly, but it will fade away.
Right.
So for
Right.
them to put something together that will benefit your core team there
Yeah.
is very much like the buyers that they have been.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's been great.
So is there any, as we think about that comment, is there anything that tipped their hand early in the process that made you think these guys are going to be good partners? Was there a characteristic that they demonstrated, or was there anything like that?
Well, they are a very acquisitive company, and there are approximately 5,000 credit unions in the country, and PenFed buys credit unions. And so they know how to go in, and a lot of these credit unions are very small. I talk about PenFed being a $40 billion company. These credit unions are, 25 to $50 million credit unions.
Right.
So kind of, I wouldn't say mom and pop, but
Yes.
but essentially like that. And so how are they successful? They are successful because they allow these people, they acquire them and allow them to keep running their business. And that's what they did with us. And I didn't really understand that they were really skilled at acquisition. You remember when we were working with Ricardo Shimura, remember? And he's a very smart guy. And, he really leads all of their M&A. And they have figured out how to buy people and monetize it. I don't know how else to say it.
Yeah. So let me ask this, because now, as I'm remembering, because I think it's important to note, number one, we banged heads with those guys pretty good a couple of times in their office.
Yeah.
So I think it illustrates the point that, it can get a little bit rough and tumble during the process and still be a very great long-term. Yeah. I would say part of the reason for that is that the one banging the heads, or otherwise said a buffer in between the two of you, was having me in this case, but have some advisor in between.
I would agree
that was critical?
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, I think, it's your business. You understand that. My business is not merger and acquisition. I danced around it, but I really had never consummated any other deals before. I know there are other CEOs who have done a lot more of that. But subsequent to doing this, I hadn't closed a deal. And, on the other side of the table, they're buying
done a few
all the time. They're doing them all the time.
Yeah.
So, but having a guy who's got all these trophies on the back of his desk.
Here's one of my favorites right here. So let me ask this, because it comes up a lot. Your team, when did you inform them that you were considering a transaction and that you had signed a transaction with PenFed? And do you remember their initial reaction to it?
So the team, I think, was pretty shocked. The team was pretty shocked. Not so much that we were considering a transaction, but that we were considering a transaction with PenFed. Because like everybody, the immediate reaction was, what does a credit union have to do with an advertising agency?
Right.
Right. So that was kind of a curveball for sure. We did not tell the staff until 24 hours before close, though.
Mm-hmm.
But we didn't. And I was concerned that we might lose some people, or, we certainly had a rocky road with some CMOs at PenFed before, so, the right now, for the last 2 or 3 years, our working relationship has been exceptional. But at that time, I would not say our working relationship was that great. And so the idea of we're going to be acquired by a company that is, we're on the verge of getting fired by. How does that work? So,
Right. So
or at least we're worried about getting fired by.
would you have told your staff, in hindsight, would you have told your staff or your executive team earlier in the process, or do you think you handled it?
No, I think the timing was right. I think the timing was right. The executive team needed to know because, as you know, there's a lot of due diligence that we had to pull forward. And I need people other than myself to pull that.
Yeah, and both Nate and Carrie were critical in that.
Yeah, absolutely critical. And so, go ahead.
I was going to say, just as we kind of bring ourselves to a close here, looking back, as I said before, over a very successful earnout that comes with its 5th annual payment here in just a couple of months, which is going to exceed what we projected from 5 years ago. And I'm thrilled to hear that. What would you, if you were going to point to 2 things that were most important, specifically around the earnout, what would you say those 2 things are?
Yeah, I think, I think at the end of the day, it's all about people. And I was very, very fortunate to have Carrie, who is very much of a people-focused thing. And so when we were acquired by them, it could have easily broken the other way, that people could have been pissed and could have left and said, I don't want to be part of a organization that is owned by a financial institution. I want to work at like you said, I want to work at a creative-driven place. The reality is we are a creative-driven company. We are in our same space. Nothing's changed. I'm in the same conference room right by my office, and we have a very eclectic, diverse, creative group of people that have fun doing work and making great creative. So I give a tremendous amount of credit to Carrie Boydell for being able to encourage people to give it enough time to see how it's really going to work.
And I think one thing that's critical to that, and you did it really well, because nobody, my guess is the saying goes, people don't like change all that much.
Yeah.
And so people react when there is change. One thing that slows their roll a little bit is if there's a pot of money at the end of a year,
right?
Let alone 2 years or 5 years or what have you.
Right.
So I would assume that if there were no other reason, and there were many others, but for no other reason to say, why don't we see what happens for a year? It was probably a main driver behind why that stuck together. The other thing I've learned, and I just like your comment on this, when people, your employees, are concerned, they're angry, they're frightened, they're excited, nobody brings this up to Matt White,
right?
Because he's the owner and the CEO. But they bring it up to their manager, right? Or the executive team. And I think to have the executive team already confident and bought in and rewarded by the future of that is really critical, because that's how the message seeps into the
rest of the agency. Yeah.
Was that your experience as well?
Yeah, I think so. And while we have, 4 key people that are get the bulk of the earnout, the rest of the earnout is spread out through the agency. So the rest of the agency is incented. I think that the structure that was created financially, was pretty sticky. And so it kept people around. And I don't know, a lot of businesses rely on equity, right? With the hope of a payout in the future. But this was tangible now. This was
every year.
This was real money now.
Right.
So I think, so the 2 things is, I think we focused on the people, we paid out the people with frankly, I think that probably the biggest thing outside of having Carrie and focusing on the people was the fact that I just was committed to 5 years and dividing the earnout.
Right. And I will say there's probably, you had attracted, because of who you are and the culture of White 64, you had attracted pretty good people all along. right? And so those people then had a chance to shine. And I will say, Matt, to most of these transactions are cash, equity, and some earnout. Again, by far, a 5-year earnout's the longest that we've ever helped somebody accomplish. To come back 5 years later and to see how much of a success this has been is great to hear. It's great to hear that you've actually outperformed and out-earned what our projections were. So that I'm thrilled about. And to gain the perspective of somebody 5 years post-transaction, I think is helpful for anybody thinking about a transaction and the structure of the economics around that, and to realize that a lot of people really do get their earnout if you have the pieces in place.
And there's always horror stories. And I think a lot of the credit goes to the fact that PenFed is a company that buys other companies and they treat people fairly. And, they have been good actors. They really have. And great owners. They have really allowed us to succeed or fail. And fortunately we've succeeded. So
I am thrilled that we were able to play a small role in that, Matt. Yeah. It was great to work on that many years ago. It's great to connect with you again. Yeah. I'm glad the organization is doing as well as it is. And it was super generous of you to take time and share your experience. So thank you so much for that.
All right, Todd. Thanks a lot, man. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Second Bite podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.